I don't know what's more frustrating, this book or the fact that I'm frustrated at it. And while that is a needlessly confusing statement that I just made, let me explain. On the face of it, Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb is everything that I look for in a good fantasy novel. It's not overly long, it has a grimdark setting, it's about dragons, and it's very proudly openly queer. I don't feel like a lot could go wrong, and yet I felt like screaming throughout most of my reading time with this book, and I'm not happy about that. I'm not gonna lie, I often get a sense of joy out of ripping apart books that I don't like, but I don't want to dislike this book. I don't feel good about this whole thing. But the way in which this book is aggravating, irritating, frustrating is pretty interesting. And I like talking about interesting things. It is a uniquely frustrating book, so let's dig into it. Now, if you go on Goodreads, and I don't often recommend that you do that, you will see that this is a very polarizing novel. Plenty of 5 stars and plenty of 1 stars. People are very disappointed by it, and sometimes those reviews mention the word woke, and obviously you can kind of throw those reviews out. They're not serious, they're pointless wastes of time, but some of them have a point to make. But I don't want to dig into that. I just want to point out that before I went into this, I knew it was a polarizing read. I knew that as many people seriously dislike it as seriously like it. And I was pretty excited to dig into it and figure that out for myself, to go on that journey and see what all of these people mean. And I'm a relatively positive person. And because reading is part of my job, I often, as I'm reading a book, or even before I open a book, I have ideas about what my video content is going to be surrounding that book, what my thumbnail will look like, what I'm going to title it. And I hoped that I would pick up this book, start reading it, fall in love with it, see that the haters were all wrong and the 1-star reviews were just being mean. And I could make a video that was titled something like, "The book that everyone is wrong to hate. Everyone dislikes this book and they're all stupid." Something inflammatory like that. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. I was deeply frustrated by this novel over and over again, so let's dig into it now that I am calming down a bit. Now, I do want to say up front that I hope L.R. Lamb never sees this video, because they seem like the kind of person that I would really, really get along with. Originally born and raised in California, L.R. Lamb now lives here in Scotland. They've written a bunch of fantasy and science fiction books. I actually bought their sci-fi novel Goldilocks ages ago and then forgot to read it, and I don't think I have it anymore. And I want to keep reading L.R. Lamb. I want to read more of their books. Based on the things I like about this book, I have high hopes that they could be a great author that I could really get along with if they wrote something different. I want to like L.R. Lamb's books, is my point. And they seem like a really cool, fun, interesting person that I kind of look up to, honestly. They seem great. But this book has me tearing my hair out. Dragonfall has an interesting premise and setup. Many, many hundreds of years ago, the world was populated by both humans and dragons. And humans took advantage of the dragons, stealing their magic, siphoning it from them for their own ends, and eventually even banishing the dragons to another dimension, a ruined place of ashy skies and erupting volcanoes, a horrible, desolate place where the dragons have been living for centuries now. And ironically, so much time has passed that humanity has forgotten its own deeds and now worships dragons as gods. That is a very morally, philosophically, politically fascinating place to be. It immediately reminds me of cultural appropriation, the way that queer culture becomes cool after a while, and the ways in which white Western people will do things like wear dreadlocks or Korean hanbok. Those are all very surface level things. Cultural appropriation and whitewashing goes a lot deeper than that, but they're the things that often spring to mind first and foremost. And the subject matter of this book reminded me of that, and I thought, okay, wow, this is really politically and philosophically interesting. Great, good start. I'm gonna love this. And then we meet our two protagonists, one of whom is a dragon. In their world, there are not many male dragons, often just the one, as far as I could tell. It's kind of confusing, I'll get to that. And our one male dragon has been given a prophecy that in some way he's going to save dragonkind, he's the last hope of their people. And to follow through with that prophecy, and to try and force it to come true, he travels through a portal into the human world. And that portal between these two worlds was opened up by our other protagonist, Arkady, who cast a spell and things went awry. Now this dragon is in the human world, and he and Arkady are magically tethered together. Their fates are entwined. And throughout much of the novel, we flip back and forth between their two perspectives. Now, in my role here, I am giving you a very basic overview of what's going on, the lore and the plot and the characters. But as I read the first quarter, maybe even the first half of this book, I constantly got the sense that L.R. Lamb was paranoid about the level of world building and lore and history, all of the Silmarillion background stuff that they had created for this very dense world, and they weren't sure how to communicate it all. And so much of this novel is exposition. For the first 2 or 3 chapters, you will be entirely lost as to what's actually going on. And it's so frustrating. This is perhaps my main beef with this book, is that you follow 2 characters as they go about advancing the plot, advancing their own stories and their relationship. But there is very, very little dialogue in this novel. The characters don't talk much, and when they do, they don't say anything interesting at all. Instead, it's very much descriptive prose. But that's a lie as well, because it's not descriptive. It's expository. For example, in the very first few chapters, we follow Arkady as they enter a tomb, and they are after something. They explain to us in a detailed rundown of the history and the lore of this entire land, that there was this terrible person called the Cursebringer who did something really bad and cursed the land and brought about a plague. But then it turns out the Cursebringer was actually Arkady's grandfather, and they don't believe that he was actually a bad person, and they've gone in to find his tomb. And by finding his tomb, they end up casting a spell and summoning the dragon, etc. The actions that are taken by Arkady are very minimal compared to the amount of exposition we are given, and this happens repeatedly. Once our dragon enters the human world and starts exploring, we keep hearing more and more about the dragon world, about the character, but he is constantly just telling us about himself. It's like audio logs in video games. Like if you're walking through the world of BioShock and you pick up an audio log and you're just walking down a corridor, your character is not doing anything interesting. Not doing any combat, not doing any dialogue, not advancing their own story, but they are listening to an audio log from something that happened that was more interesting days or weeks or months ago that you're not involved with, that you can't see or experience as the player. And it's the big problem with these audio logs and files that you find in video games, is they often describe and depict an event that is more interesting than what you, the player, are actually doing, with characters that are more lively than the character that you are embodying. And that happens over and over again in this book. These characters keep telling you interesting history and lore that isn't happening. And so they end up doing very little because they're busy telling you background information and shoveling exposition down your throat. And I don't want it. I don't need it. There had to be a better way to communicate all of the background information and world building to us, instead of having characters just constantly describe themselves. It feels so inhuman. About a third of the way through the book, we meet a third character, a very uninteresting character whose story felt like it could have been cut entirely. And when you first meet this character, I remember reading their first I can't remember this character's name. I remember reading their first chapter where they were describing their relationship to this old man who he raised her to be something, it doesn't matter. And she is just describing him in so much detail, but I don't know who he is. I don't know who she is. And at no point in the chapter does she really do anything. She just speaks to us her exposition so that we understand the context of where she is and the person she's talking to, but we don't see her do anything. There are so few actions interactions in this book. So few things happen. I mean, it really ramps up as it goes. And I've seen a lot of people say, oh, it's slow to start and then it gets there after the first maybe quarter. I would argue it doesn't get interesting until like at least halfway, maybe even more, with like a very intense third act. But for so much of this book, nothing happens. And instead you are just fed exposition, and as I said, there is no dialogue. L.R. Lamb has not written interesting dialogue for these characters to express and communicate, and fantasy books, for my taste, live and die by their dialogue, by their character interactions, by characters connecting with each other and forming bonds with each other and bantering with each other. A party of heroes having fun and funny conversations. Heroes and villains giving each other monologues and exchanging threats like it's a tennis match. And characters who fall in love, expressing their frustrations and their desires, and what they want for the future as the story moves forward. This is a thing about writing, is that pretty much anything that is said or done should be advancing either the plot or something to do with a character, their motivations, their experiences, how they feel, who they are as a person. We should be watching them grow, or we should be watching their story advance. And I feel like at no point does this really happen. It feels like the book is a person walking backwards, looking at the past. They can't talk to anyone in front of them because their back is to them, and instead they're looking at the history of the world and telling it to us while we're desperately going, but what's happening? Can you do something interesting? Nothing's happening. I'm so deeply frustrated. And then I have another gripe that I almost don't want to bring up because it makes me seem so nitpicky and ungrateful, I guess, as a queer person. But this is a very openly queer book, and the very first inkling of that you get is the way that pronouns are handled. And I have issues with this. There are he's and she's and they's in this book. Great. Representation, I'm all for it. Congratulations. But L.R. Lamb has chosen to do this on the surface clever thing, where certain pronouns are capitalized in order to show respect and to demonstrate the fact that there is a class and an honor system within this world. It's a good bit of world building. It's a good way to be expository without shoving that down your throat until the book gets to a moment where it explains how these pronouns work in case you didn't figure it out for yourself, and I did, because it is pretty clear. If a person is being talked about, and of course I'm talking in the descriptive prose because there's barely any dialogue, if the person talking about them respects them or is of a lower class or a lower station, then the pronoun describing that person, be it he, she, or they, will be written with a capitalized first letter to demonstrate that respect. I personally found that incredibly jarring. Maybe this is autism or ADHD. Maybe this is just me being nitpicky and needlessly frustrated, but every single time I read a pronoun with a capital letter, it jarred me out of the book. I felt like I pulled a funny face. Because we use capitalized first letters for proper nouns all the time. Any person's name, any place name. I understand how that works. But to use it for a pronoun feels so unnatural. It feels like it cuts the flow of the reading experience. And obviously you're not going to get it from an audiobook, which is just something that's occurred to me. And so as you're reading it, you've suddenly got a capitalized he, like people do for God. And I find it so jarring. And the fact that it only happens sometimes is clever on the face of it because it demonstrates the fact that there is a class layered system here. There's a system of honorifics. Okay. Good. I've studied Japanese. I understand how honorifics work in certain languages. Like in the case of Japanese, a dialogue between two people can sound entirely different depending on your age, your gender, and the situation or context in which those two people are talking. Like entire words, phrases, and sentences sound entirely different. Entire different words are used, especially when it comes to pronouns. Now, I'm not fluent and I'm not here to give you a Japanese lesson, but I just want to emphasize the fact that I do respect what L.R. Lamb is doing here with this book and the way that language works. That's great. I just found it so distracting and I don't think it works very well. And now that I've said all this out loud, I realize that my issue here actually isn't with queer representation in any way or pronouns or anything else. It's literally more of a linguistic or a grammatical choice that they've made. I don't like it. I just found it very frustrating. The big problem with this book really is just the issue of exposition and the fact that It is such an all-encompassing problem that it mars everything else in the novel. The fact that L.R. Lamb is doing this thing that I described where it feels like the characters are walking backwards and looking at the past, it means that the characters really lack personality. And I've read reviews, like, I recently discovered Grimdark magazine. I'd never come across it before. Grimdark magazine is great. I've been reading some of their reviews. I've been thinking about buying some issues of the physical magazine. They're awesome. They loved this book. One of their critics was giving it a really glowing review, and I liked that review. I thought that I couldn't really disagree with any point that they made, except a point that they made about the characters being interesting. That they're not, because they are not present in the moment throughout the course of the story. The characters describe themselves. It's not how character writing works. Because so much of this novel is written in the first person from multiple perspectives, it creates this eeriness that these characters are always just describing themselves to you. That's not how a first-person narrative should work. Characters should be describing each other, especially through dialogue with other people. So you get this natural flow where you learn about person A because persons B and C are having a chat about person A. It's a great way to express not only who person A is, but what other people's opinions are of them. So you might get a more layered and textured idea of who person A is and how they belong contextually within the world and within the social context of the place and time. Because not only do you understand now roughly who person A is, but you maybe understand that despite what you know about them, other people don't like them, maybe for different reasons or because they have a different personality and different attitude, and thus you are also learning about persons B and C. This is good dialogue writing, what I'm describing here. It doesn't fucking exist in this book. Instead, you have first-person narratives all the time where characters just describe themselves. They give opinions about themselves. They tell you who they are and what their background is and their family history. And then they will say one or two words to another character, and then when we flip to that character's perspective, they tell us about themselves and their opinions. And it feels like a series of prosaic monologues without any character dialogue, progression, building, and actual momentum through the story. Things happen in this book. Plenty happens, but it never feels like it. It never feels like you're actually present. It never feels like you're tangibly moving forward through time. It feels more like things are just being told to you, and it's so static and sluggish and bland, and the lack of dialogue is eerie, it's frustrating, it's almost sad. There's a somberness to it, and not just because the world is very dark, it's a very sad place, and the politics are interesting, and the situation right now, and the history with the dragons, it's all very interesting, ideally. But it's the way in which it's expressed. I did a review recently of R.F. Kuang's Catabasis, and I had a few people in my comments saying they don't get along with her writing style. I personally am flummoxed by that because I don't see anything bad or strange or out of left field about how she writes. She writes in a pretty standard way. I wouldn't say that R.F. Kuang is a particularly poetic or experimental writer. I can understand if someone doesn't like Lord of the Rings because it's dated and heavy and slow. I can understand people not liking certain authors because of the way that they write, sure. R.F. Kuang is not one of them because her writing is so inoffensive and standard. It's a bog standard way of writing a book. The things that make R.F. Kuang great are her politics and her themes and her characters and how she's just so fucking clever. But with L.R. Lamb, this is a style of writing, storytelling, and plot progression that you can get frustrated with. I am very frustrated with it. It's what this entire book is about. The way that Lamb delivers this story is so aggravating. I like the characters. Ideally. I really like the world, the story, the politics, the questions, the philosophies that are brought to the table. And they are brought right from the beginning. Right from just reading the blurb, I understand what is going to be interesting about this book, but the way that it is delivered is so frustrating. I was just constantly ripping my hair out. All the way through, I wanted to scream over and over again because the delivery of everything, every single choice that is made when it comes to the characters and the plot, and the strange lack of dialogue, it really exhausted me. Ultimately, This is just a book that I thought would be for me, but isn't. And the reason that is particularly frustrating is because it still is for me. Ideally, this could be a great book that I would love. I mean, depending on who you ask, it is a great book. For me, it's not. But I understand that it could be if only it had been written differently. If only Lamb had made different choices when it comes to exposition, world building, and character progression. Characters do progress, I just don't like the way it's done. That's the thing, I like everything about this book, I just don't like the way that it is. It's the best way to sum it up. What it is good, but how it is bad. That's really frustrating. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please don't tag L.R. Lamb in it, because I think that they're probably a really, really lovely, interesting, clever person, and I don't want to offend them. I just thought it was so interesting how this book is frustrating. The choices that are made, I wanted to express and explore it, because it is... Okay, I just had a knock at the door and I totally lost my train of thought. I'm pretty sure I was halfway through a sentence. I'm gonna leave it there. This is a book that I should have really enjoyed. And I didn't, and I'm annoyed about that. I find it interesting how the choices of writing and expression can entirely ruin a reading experience when the thing that you're reading is clearly good and interesting. It demonstrates the fact that having good ideas for characters and world and plot and everything else is very much only half the battle. The other half is actually writing it down. And I don't like the way that L.R. Lamb wrote it down. It doesn't mean that I think L.R. Lamb is a bad writer. This is the only book of theirs that I've read. I just don't like the choices that they made here with this book. But because I like the ideas that they present, I want to keep reading them. I want to read their science fiction. It might be entirely different. I'll go and see if I still have that copy of Goldilocks. I have faith that L.R. Lamb is a clever writer. I just don't like the choices that they made. Do you agree? Have you read this book? Do you understand my frustrations? Do you disagree? Are there authors that have done this to you? Authors whose writing style you just couldn't get behind and you were frustrated by their storytelling choices and methods? Let me know. Let's have a chat about it. And subscribe for books.